All right. I'm going to call to order this February 13th, 2025 Lexington Planning Commission meeting. And first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. I believe we might do. Does anybody have any changes that they would like to?
I'd like to offer one change if it pleases the commission. If we could move items D and E to after A, I have to leave at 6 o'clock and would like to hear the public comment if it's okay with the rest of commission.
Do we need a second on that?
Second.
All right. And all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries unanimously. So we will move items D and E up to right after A. Okay, next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the January 9th, 2025 meeting. Any comments? They seemed good to me, but I was not here, so.
Good. I
Move that the minutes from the January 9th meeting be accepted.
I second that.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? And motion carries unanimously. All right, next item is citizens' comments on matters that are not on the agenda. So I will open up the floor if there are anybody who wants to make a comment on items that are not on the agenda. Please step up forward. And seeing as there are none, I'll close that section and open up new business. So the first item of new business is CUP 2025-02, an application by Misty Camden for approval of a conditional use permit to allow a portion of Lexington Presbyterian Church located at 120 South Main Street, tax map number 23-1-180, to be used as a daycare center. And Arnie, do we have a staff report?
Indeed, a daycare center is a conditional use in the C1 zoning district, and therefore we have a request this evening for the rear portion of the Lexington Presbyterian Church at 120 South Main Street to be operated as a daycare center. And specifically, it's in that portion of Murray Hall that's towards Randolph Street, not the portion that's fronting onto South Main Street. You do have a map on the bottom of the first page of your staff report with the little star indicating Murray Hall, which again is towards Randolph Street and not towards Main Street. On the next page, you see a picture of the Presbyterian Church from Randolph Street. And the request is for Yellow Brick Road to operate a satellite facility here in Lex Pres. And the proposal is to enroll approximately 34 children aged 6 weeks to 5 years with 11 adult staff on site. The center would use the South Randolph Street entrance and would operate from 7:45 a.m. to 5:15 p.m. Monday through Friday. Proposal includes a request that the 4 on-street parking spaces on Randolph Street directly in front of the entrance to Murray Hall be signed for 10-minute parking only Monday through Friday, so that they can be used during drop-off and pickup. Their staff would be parking in the Roy Smith parking lot. We've provided for you on the top of page 8 of your overall packet, just the intent really section for C1, and then this definition following that for daycare center. And then, as you always have in your reports, the conditions of issuance, which are really your criteria. We always ask that you make your motions based on some of the criteria listed here, just for the record. And for what it's worth, I also have some staff comments there for each of those in italics. There is a comprehensive plan strategy, and sorry, I'm over on page 9 now. LE 1.2 to encourage the development of safe, affordable, quality childcare. We did reach out to a number of city staff who normally review we call it a design and review team, normally for site plans, but we reached out in this particular case to see if there would be any other potential conflicts. And you have the comments there from those staff members. I'm over on page 10. The only expected impact really is related to the parking drop off and pickup, as you might expect. That once the children are dropped off, they would be inside. They even have a sort of courtyard, open air courtyard. So the play area would be in that, and there's a wall So it's really self-contained within the building once they're in, and we don't really expect many impacts, at least not from the exterior. And therefore, most concerned or interested in what will happen during drop off and pickup. The applicant is requesting that the 4 on-street parking spaces, and you might be able to see perhaps most of those in the photograph back on page 7. Sorry for flipping around so much, but they are fairly well segmented or segregated from the rest of the parking spaces, because on the right-hand side in the photograph, it's not quite shown as the driveway for the back of Larry Mann's building. On the left side is that alleyway. So these 4 spaces are fairly self-contained directly in front of this portion of the Lex Pres Church. And for those spaces, the applicant was asking for 10-minute parking throughout the entire day. So that would make those spaces only available for 10-minute parking, which makes sense for drop off and pickup. But staff is actually recommending that those 4 spaces be signed for the drop off hour of 7:30 to 8:30 a.m. as 10-minute. And then again in the afternoon from 3:30 to 5:30 for those hours to be limited or assigned for 10-minute, but the rest of the day remain 2-hour parking. We think that's a more efficient use of the parking spaces that we have. And for what it's worth, we've also had a renewed interest, perhaps more recently, in parking downtown with input from some of our merchants. We have 4 conditions there listed that staff is recommending. Now I'm just going to read those in the record. These are fairly straightforward and have come from other daycares or private school conditional use permits. The first one, the proposed daycare shall be occupied and used by a maximum of 34 students at any one time. However, in no case shall the number of students be allowed to exceed the maximum occupancy or limits established by all applicable state and local building codes. They're asking for 34 students, so that's why it's in the condition. If they ever increase the space that they're utilizing within the church, they would have to come back and amend the conditional use permit. Number 2, the daycare center shall operate primarily between 7:45 a.m. and 5:15 p.m. with only occasional activities outside of those hours. That was the hours that they asked for. If they have an after-school event, something perhaps as a fundraiser on an occasion, that's perfectly acceptable. We don't see much of an impact from that. Number 3, the building will at all times be used in full conformance with the current adopted Virginia Unified Statewide Building Code and the current adopted Virginia Statewide Fire Protection Code. And number 4, no change in the design or use of the building shall be undertaken unless such change is in full compliance with the above referenced building and fire codes. I would think that this last 2 be fairly self-evident, just trying to protect the kids or the students. We do have a recommended or suggested motion. I'm going to go back up to the second paragraph, sorry, on page 10. We are not recommending a condition for the signing of the parking spaces simply because that's under the city's purview anyway, really under the city manager's purview, as is the section there, the city code is quoted. So for that reason, staff is not making a specific recommended condition for the parking. But it may help if you, in your discussion, have any sort of opinion on whether it should be 10-minute only, or as staff is recommending, sort of 2-hour during most of the day, except for 10-minute in the drop off and the pickup times. Just might be helpful for council to know that. Happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Arnie? I will point out that on page 15, there is a photo that shows the 4 parking spots very clearly.
And I should thank you for that. And on page 13 is also what Misty provided as a narrative that might also be really helpful on how the operation will occur.
Just so you know, for some reason, the packets that I printed out this afternoon do not have overall page numbers. Just so
Oh,
some folks up here don't have overall page numbers. Don't know how that
Okay.
happened.
sorry for that.
Okay. If there are no questions for Arnie,
I have one little
Oh,
question,
yeah, go
and
ahead.
that is on page 9, where the comments, for example, the building official was talking about the installation of a fire sprinkler system. Is that something that we put in the conditions, or they already know that?
they're aware of that. That will get picked up when the building permit is issued, but we wanted to put it in the record, and the church is 100% aware of it already. But that was a comment that came from the building official. Just please be aware that I should say a sprinkler system isn't necessarily required, but there's so many standards that the only way to meet those standards is through a sprinkler system. And the church is well aware of it. They have, I believe, went out and gotten plans for the sprinkler system, so they know that that's part of the requirement for this daycare facility to go in.
I actually do have a question, and it's about, it's sort of related to that area, that section on page 9 under planning. It indicates that the last line indicates it's affordable daycare. And I was just wondering, since it's in a church and the church is off the tax rolls, correct? Is this a taxable? I mean, the business would be taxable, correct?
I don't know the answer. They would have to either extend their business license from where they already operate. And the more complicating is, yes, it's being done in the church, but it's still Yellow Brick Road,
Right.
which I suspect is a not-for-profit. So the short answer is I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe that's a question for I don't know.
But I think the
city
point-
council.
I think the point is it's in the comprehensive plan for encouraging the development of safe, affordable, quality childcare. And it's also in the strategic plan. And then if you look at Misty's narrative, it does mention in the second paragraph, our mission is to provide accessible, affordable, and developmentally appropriate childcare.
Well, I'll ask Misty. I assume she's here. Yeah. Hi. Okay. Are there any other questions for Arnie?
One, it's probably a typo, but on page 9, where in the middle of the page, it says comprehensive plan strategies applicable to WNL. So, okay, just for the record.
My mistake.
Okay. So that would be City of Lexington or daycare centers? Daycare centers,
yeah.
thanks.
Or to the property, yep.
All right. Well then, barring further questions for Arnie, if the applicant has a statement, you can step up to the podium.
You don't have to make it, but you can make yourself available for questions if you like.
Sure. I can
However,
answer any
And if you'll
questions.
just state your name and address for the record.
So I'm Misty Hamden and I'm the director at Yellow Brick Road Early Learning Center.
Wonderful. And do you have a statement or?
Not per se a statement, but this is such a huge need in this community. I have 97 on my wait list. However, today I have 105. So I get calls every day. There are foster families that need care. It's just a huge passion for me to make that happen. And we've gone through so many hoops and we keep jumping and we're just hoping that it'll happen.
Wonderful. So if you'll just hang on for a minute, does anybody have questions for Ms. Camden?
I'll just ask, the 37 students that you want to be permitted for right now, is that based on your available space or?
Correct.
Okay.
That's all that we're allowed to.
Okay.
So I have a question. On page 13, for those of you who have numbers, your statement, you indicate that the improvements are estimated to cost $1 million. Is that accurate? Wow. That's a lot of,
Want to make sure that not only is it a quality center, but it's going to be a comprehensive, well-established daycare center.
right? That's fantastic. And then is it a nonprofit?
Yes.
Okay, great. Does anybody else have any questions?
I have a question for you about the parking, the recommendation from from Ernie to maybe have it 2-hour maximum during the times that the daycare is not picking up or dropping off. Do you see any problem with that as far as like the pickup? Because I just imagine someone could be parked there, let's say at 4:45 in that spot, and they're there for 2 hours. Is that gonna create any
As
conflict?
concerned about that is that I'm concerned, like today when we had a 2-hour delay, we're outside of that window, or we have a pickup at 1 o'clock, we're still outside of that window. So we may have to develop a strategic plan to be able to possibly have parents park and come and pick up, or if that's the recommendation.
Would having, I was looking at the photograph, all right, on page 15, that shows so there's the driveway that's between the Presbyterian church and I guess the library where Heliotrope's driveway is. I was just wondering if that first spot that's labeled number 1 was 10-minute all day. Would that help with alleviating some of the pressure? Because then you would always have that 10-minute spot and there would be a pull away,
See
an
what you're
easy
saying.
pull away.
I mean, it could be helpful. I foresee that we could make a plan where certain ages pick up at a certain time and have it staged that way. Right now, we currently have 88 students at our current facility, and we have them in and out of the car line in 10 to 12 minutes.
Right.
So it's something that can work
So what I actually meant was to have that one be 10-minute all day.
all day.
And then the other one's 10-minute during
Those drop
during
off
that.
line, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. Thank you so much. All right. Next item is public comment. Do we have any members of the public who would like to make a comment about this item on the agenda? If you'll come up to the podium and state your name and address for the record. And if you'll speak into the microphone, that'll be helpful.
Say again,
If you'll speak into the microphone, that would be
that's good
helpful.
enough.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
I'm Leon Johanning. I got a love letter from the city. Since I'm an adjacent property owner, I think I think Arnie made clear that the request to the planning commission isn't really for the 120 Main Street, which is the front of the Presbyterian Church, is really 115 South Randolph Street, which is right behind.
Right.
I own 2 buildings at 114 South Randolph and 116 right behind.
Are you between Nelson Street and the Presbyterian or on the other side?
Right
Across
behind
the
the
street.
Presbyterian Church Sunday
Gotcha.
School.
Okay.
Randolph Street is a very busy street, so my comments are really for safety.
Mhm.
If you go up to the Lexington post office, that's another very busy, everybody's playing a game of ballet or dancing to try to get in and out.
Mhm.
So I'm concerned that 34 parent and 34 infants or young people have to be delivered and picked up all in the morning and the evening. And I think I've heard there's a 10-minute parking sign is going to be put up for those pickup and drop off times. Is that what I heard?
Well, that's what we're talking about, but that'll be a city council, city manager.
Well, I mean, that was what is applied for. That's the discussion.
Yes, but yes.
This is a public hearing. I don't hear too well and you all don't speak too loudly. So I'm picking up what I can.
Sorry about that. We'll do better about speaking into the microphones as well.
So I'm really addressing this for the safety concerns between, I reckon, 7 o'clock in the morning and 5:30 in the evening. There are approximately 19 parking spaces along Randolph Street on the right side, which would be available, but they're not usually available. You have to sort of pick and choose where you find a place. There's Roy Smith parking lot down 47 steps beside the Randolph Street Methodist Church. 47 down, 47 up. I don't really think that the parking lot is going to provide much relief, except for very athletic parents. there are about 50 parking spots in the area around the steps at Roy Smith, but usually maybe you could find 10 during the day. The Hugawatt Lane, which was the original name of the lane between Randolph Street and Main Street beside the Presbyterian Church. A brewery and beer joint has seemed to have taken that over. Arnie, do you know if that was a conditional use permit, or is that still a public way?
That is not a public alley.
I walk through it all the time.
It is not a, it was never dedicated to the city, so it is still privately owned. The city does not have control over that alley.
Who owns it?
A number of adjacent property owners, as I think I understand it.
Well, that would make a nice, if it wasn't for it being blocked, it would make a nice circular pickup and delivery. Has a traffic study been done on the amount of traffic that would, I'm asking who's the applicant? Are you the applicant? Has a traffic study been done? You plan on doing one? I think a traffic study would be needed to address the safety issue.
Okay.
And I think that a on-duty school safety officer should be available to try to resolve any traffic problems. I'm very concerned because I have an engineering studio at 115 Randolph Street. And H&J Tire, which I'm sure everybody here has used, 3 or 4 times a day, they do road tests. And it's not just on Randolph Street, it's quite a circuit that they go on. But there's a lot of traffic on Randolph Street. So
Right.
I think that's a concern that I have.
Okay.
I'm aware of the evolving church's involvement in the childcare effort, and it's gotten down now to providing room for Yellow Brick Road. The church won't have anything to do with the school. They're just providing facilities. And therefore, being a member and on the administration committee that's listened to all these proposals, I think that the safety concerns should be resolved. That's I'd say a planning commission responsibility as well as the applicant.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. Do you have anything else that you would like to make note
No,
of?
I usually talk too much anyway.
All right.
I made my point.
Thank you, Mr. Johanning. I appreciate your time.
This is repurposing of facilities in Lexington. I went over last Thursday to Buena Vista to hear the results of the countywide child care survey.
Mm.
It's a big problem.
Yes, it is.
It's almost unaffordable to have children anymore, especially when both parents work. When I left the building over there at Mountain Gateway Community College, I learned that quite nice building that's been there 17 years is going to be abandoned because they're moving to a Ford dealership facility in Buena Vista.
Well, I think that's a Buena Vista issue as opposed to a Lexington Planning Commission.
No, I'm just saying it so the applicants can hear that is a facility
I
that's
see.
more than adequate
I see.
for the Rockbridge area children's hospital, which I think a childcare facility needs to be a hospital standard facility. Safety, health, and education. Okay?
All right. Thank you so much. Are there any other members of the public who would like to make a comment about this issue on the agenda? All right, I'm going to close the public comment section, and we will move on to the commission discussion and decision. So does anybody have any thoughts, comments, concerns?
Shannon, can I ask Misty one other question about
course.
pick up and drop off now, how it works at your facility? I know from Waddell Elementary, which has 320 students, the actual drop off and pickup takes 15, 20 minutes. It's surprisingly fast. I imagine with yours, your parents are spaced out, but could you describe general drop off and pickup for the 80?
Sure.
kids you have?
So, we have like a 15-minute window and they just pull up. We have staff stationed at areas and they get them out of the car and then they take them in. And then it's a steady roll of people that come through.
Do you have much of a line waiting to drop off?
Maybe 5 to 6 parents at a time.
Yeah.
But it goes really quickly. What we see here is that we're going to definitely have to make sure that there's a strategic way of people
Right.
picking up. So that it's not going to be, if you come and there's not a space open and you need to circle the block until you have that opportunity.
Right. And by chance, have you talked to the library at all, especially with the morning, about if you ever needed?
I've reached out to her,
Okay.
but she hasn't reached back out, but I'm going to make a point too,
Okay.
because that could potentially help.
Yeah, right. If
Yeah.
you ever find there's some backup, maybe you could use their
Sure.
parking lot as circular drives.
Same with the access to heliotrope. I don't know who owns that. Is that owned by the same folks who own heliotrope? Is it owned by the
It
library?
was the Hogwatt Alley that Mr. Johanning mentioned. So it is not public. It was never dedicated to us. I think a couple of the adjacent property owners own that. So the owner of the heliotrope building, I think, is partial owner. I think Mr. Hostetter, who owns the building where the photography studio is now, I think they are all sort of part owners. I think there are 5 or 6 people that may have some interest in that alley, not public, but
Right.
private.
So that might make it a little bit more complicated in terms of, having people unloading in front of that alley, but I guess it might be worth having a conversation with them. Any other comments, concerns, ideas?
I'll make a couple comments.
Please.
As Arnie mentioned, helping provide childcare is a goal of the city. It's also on our strategic plan for city council. I chaired that group and we did a brief study on the childcare needs. And as Misty Camden had said, there is a great need for childcare, particularly affordable childcare. And that's where it really is beneficial having it in a church. I work at a church and we have a very small half-day preschool program in the morning. And I think it's wonderful when church buildings are used every day, all day, rather than just being used a couple days a week. I imagine this will help them with costs. I'm hoping they're getting a affordable deal as far as rent goes, but it is hard to run a child care or preschool if you're not getting some breaks on things like that. So I think this is a great use of space. We may have a few bumps getting used to the drop off and pick up, but I really don't even see that being a big problem. It's a short period of time, not during the busiest times of the day. So I think this is a wonderful an option, and I really appreciate the Presbyterian Church working with Yellow Brick Road to provide childcare for our community.
I actually have another question for Missy, if you don't mind. Sorry to make you get up and down. So you said you have 105 students on the list.
Correct.
Do you keep track of whether they are from the city of Lexington or elsewhere? And do you give preference to people who are in the city of Lexington, given that these are city streets and city parking spaces?
So no, this is my curriculum specialist.
So if you'll state your name and address.
My name's Pam Altizer. I'm the curriculum specialist at Yellow Brick Road. We do keep up with the localities that we serve. About 30 of the students are from Lexington City. About that amount around are from Rockbridge and fewer from Buena Vista, but some come as far from Allegheny and Covington.
Wow.
So, but normally it's about the same amount Lexington City to Rockbridge. Fluctuates each year based on enrollment.
And are the parents who are coming from Allegheny, I assume they're working in the area? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you so much. Any other comments?
No, I mean, I appreciate the safety concerns. I think they're real, but as Leslie said, the childcare crunch is so critical, and it's a strategic plan priority. And I'm pretty convinced that we've got responsible and professional organization with a track record of handling drop off. We've heard descriptions of how that works, and so I don't see any problem with it. Like, I think this is really important for the community. If you spend time in the community with young families, like, this is something you just hear about constantly, is that, like, I can't access affordable childcare, and so it stops people from being able to work, right? Or it just makes their lives complicated, costly, affects their choices, makes their welfare worse. And so I think we should, I'm certainly going to support this.
Okay.
I have one little question for Misty also, please. For example, again, on the safety issue, if, just wondering, is there a plan to have only, let's see, that would be the southbound lane on Randolph Street, have that for drop off? And in other words, would people be able to go to the other side, park and walk the kids across? Because that's where it could be dangerous. I don't know if you're going to really
So
try and enforce that, or how
So
you
there's
would do
no
that.
parking on the left side. So, and unless you parked down in the parking lot, you
Mhm.
couldn't do that. And it would be against our licensing to have them cross a street. So they have to get out on the side that they can't.
That's what I was wondering about. I'm not familiar with that, so that's good to know.
Okay. And so, and this is a question for you, Arnie, I think. Would it be possible to designate one of the spots as a all day 10-minute spot and then have the other three just have those windows, the drop off and pick up windows?
Yeah, it definitely is possible. What I would perhaps recommend, so that we maybe break this into two, one motion for the approval, and then maybe a second one just for if the will of the commission is to make an additional recommendation to exactly to your point, not to follow the request or the staff recommendation, but to change it a little bit so that one space is a 10-minute only all day.
Mhm.
And that way that also gets carried forward to council.
Okay. And that requires a motion or
I think it
just
would be helpful to do it that way, yes.
Okay. So are we ready to make a motion then?
Yep.
Okay.
I'd be glad to make a motion. I move to approve conditional use permit number CUP 2025-02 for a daycare center at 120 South Main Street as proposed by the applicant and with the staff recommended conditions. Shall I read those conditions into the record as well, or is having them written sufficient?
You don't need to read them.
Those four as stated in the text before us then.
Okay, we have a motion
A second.
and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries unanimously. Congratulations. And do we have a motion about parking? Somebody want to make a motion about parking?
I'll make it as a recommendation. Is that how we make a motion that we recommend to city council that at least one spot be a 10-minute all day spot in front of the church?
And then the other 3,
2 hour.
Yeah, I'll leave it up to them. I mean, do we care? Just as long as at least one is 10-minute all times. But yes, assuming that the other three are 10-minute during pickup and drop off.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kate. Do you need a you need a new motion?
I second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? And the motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much for coming. And we are going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which, because we altered the agenda, is now the item numbered D. Initiate cottage housing development zoning text amendment. So resolution 25-01. Do we have text that I should read into this?
Oh, words you probably don't want to hear. We're trying something new.
Okay.
State code says that a text amendment can either be initiated by resolution of council, which we've done before, or motion of planning commission, or by a property owner. We've always taken your motion tonight as an example in the last item, your motion to recommend for approval as the motion. But I've found out that other jurisdictions, not many, but other jurisdictions apparently do a more formal process, and that is this resolution. Mind you, we're not doing it in perhaps the best order. We probably should have done this last year at this time before, as we were starting this text amendment for cottage housing. But we're just trying to get this in as a placeholder or as the initiation element or mechanism. So it is a little bit odd in the configuration or timing of it, but all it really says is we're going to initiate an amendment. And even I think, one of the whereas is
Third paragraph from the
the
bottom.
third one, 1, 2, 3. Whereas it does not presume, this resolution does not presume that any amendment, the language for which is to be developed, will be adopted or similarly obligate the planning commission and city council to adopt such an amendment. So it's just saying you're going to consider something. So it's fairly benign, but it's just the mechanism to initiate a zoning text amendment.
Okay, I think that I'm not clear where you're reading from. Which, are we on a,
Page 29, for those of you who have page numbers.
yeah, okay.
Resolution,
Thank you.
sorry.
I did read that. Okay, so we don't need to read this into the record.
Heavens no. But we are hoping for perhaps a motion to approve the resolution.
Okay, do we need to perhaps discuss it?
Okay.
Yes. Does anybody have anything, any comments, concerns about? Yes.
One thing I didn't explain why this is helpful is that if somebody's looking back 10 years from now and who initiated this, then it's obvious in the record who initiated the amendment. And sometimes that's helpful to know.
Right. Absolutely. It makes sense. Okay, so does anybody have any comments or concerns about this motion? And if not, I would be happy to entertain a motion to adopt this, recommend this, adopt this.
Adopt this. Or for this chair's signature.
So we're making a motion to adopt this for the chair's signature. I would like to make a motion to adopt this for the chair's signature.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And the motion carries unanimously. Okay, and so now after, so I will sign this at some point. Is that correct? Okay,
I'll bring you one next time. Sorry.
okay, brilliant. Okay, so moving on to E, the annual zoning ordinance amendment 25-01, cottage housing. Do we have a staff report?
Nothing new to add except for the last 2 meetings. We've gone through the final drafts. You've made amendments that's clearly in the minutes from the last meeting. The only new thing, if I could get you to flip over to the last page. Kate astutely realized we didn't have a definition. So every time we have an item that is in the use matrix, we should have a definition in the definition section. So quickly went through. So this is the only item that's new, therefore it's underlined for you for your consideration. This is a definition that came from Fort Townsend. And then I quickly this afternoon, you have a separate handout on your desks, which has two other definitions as well, just for consideration. I thought perhaps you might want some choices for what it's worth. I believe the first one is superior to the other two, but I'll leave that up to you. So that's the only item that you have not seen as a definition for cottage housing development. And we would recommend that you recommend one of those.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk about the definition first, if you all don't mind. I noticed in the minutes that there was a discussion about the minimum number of people, and we ended up with no minimum number or maximum number, correct? There was no number of people associated with. So, do we want to actually say smaller households? I guess that would be my question. Or do we just want to leave it as small residences? If we're going with the Port Townsend,
It says smaller households.
it says small residences for smaller households. And I'm just wondering, since we got rid of the number,
Right.
if we actually don't want to say for smaller households because, or,
Oh.
mhm.
Oh.
Or we can leave it in there as sort of a guiding, like this is actually the intent is smaller
Yeah.
households without giving a number.
I think I like that.
That's kind of how we settled. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right, so do we want to read these out loud? We haven't had time to look at these, but I like the Port Townsend.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, I like
I
the
like
Port
that.
Townsend.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't see any features of the others to recommend them over it.
Right,
Very similar and not as good.
right, exactly. Okay, so it sounds like we'll go with the definition that you all recommended. And that is at the back of the packet. So is there anything, any last minute comments, critiques before we vote on this ordinance? Or are we ready? We have no, well, I guess, sorry, I should have opened it up for public comment, but there's no member of the public here. So we skipped that. So I'm opening and closing public comment. So any other comments before we?
Leslie, did you see a typo? No, there wasn't really a typo. I just, in the purpose and intent, the second sentence, so I don't have the page numbers.
34.
It said the cottage housing development design standards contained in this article are intended to create a small community of cottages for smaller households and of no more than 3 bedrooms. I didn't know if you really need a small community of cottages and take that one small out. But now reading that definition, that kind of has the same thing. I'm okay with that. Because it could have 18 cottages in it. So is that,
Is that small?
yeah.
Debatable. But it's not 35.
Right. Yeah, right.
Isn't it even if we were gonna do like 18, we were gonna try to put it where they were smaller, like sections within that community, right? So it's still like a smaller
Talk
one. It's
about
just
that.
like, instead of having like all, 18 surrounding it, it might be like 6, 6, 6, right? So which would still fit within the smaller community
So
of
we
cottages.
talked about that. Is that,
Exactly. We talked about it. It was a practice in one of the other places that you'd have no more than 12, I think, in a
Yeah.
pod. And if you were going to do more, then you would do 2 pods.
Right.
So we talked about it, but I have to go back and look to see if we actually required it because 12 is the maximum except for in RM and there we went 18. So I don't think that we came back and specified that in RM you had to do 2 pods of 9 or
I'm mostly saying I think it's good. I wasn't arguing with it. I was just like, I think
Yeah.
we did kind of
Yeah.
say that that's something we talked about anyways. So I think even saying a small community of cottages.
And I'm fine with it, especially after reading the
Right.
definition and
Mhm.
now it
I
Like
think we
the-
linked it to the size of the lot. and That's what I thought we. Smaller lot.
Right. Right. And there are not that many places where you could have 18, correct?
no.
Not that many that I can think of. No, not in our jurisdiction.
Right. Okay, well. Anyone?
What are we making a motion now? Like, what is the procedure that we're embarking upon here? We're putting it forward? What's the wording?
Sorry, we did not provide you language, but it's a motion to recommend either approval of denial of the proposed cottage housing use and design standards.
Am I making too many motions? Is somebody, no, okay, I'd like to move that we approve the cottage housing text amendment to be forwarded to city council for further consideration.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and opposed? And the motion carries. Hooray!
We did it.
It's been a long time coming, but success. Okay, so let's go back on the agenda to the application by this, sorry, the item B, formerly known as B, ECCOA 2025-01, an application for the city, by the city of Lexington for approval of a certificate of appropriateness for a new signage for temporary city offices at 626 Waddell Street, tax map 35-1-12, owned by the city of Lexington. Do you want to do these together or Arnie?
We should probably do them separately.
Okay.
Two different
So-
properties.
Do you have a, thank you, Leslie. Do we have a staff report?
We do, and I just realized on page 16, for those of you who have page numbers, the top one says ECCOA 2025-02, but this is actually 01 for 626 Waddell Street, for what that's worth. We do have a request because we're in an entrance corridor. If we have a new sign, then we have to bring that in front of you. We have very little, and I'm not even going to read the sizes there. And on page, your entrance corridor text, as an example, on page 18 under B signage, each parcel shall have an overall sign plan which reflects a consistent style and specifies the size and color scheme of the proposed sign. Number 2, materials used in signs and their support structures should reflect the building served by the sign. And number 3, sign colors should be harmonious with the building which they serve. That's really the only guidance that you have for signage in the entrance corridor. And you'll notice on the second photograph on page 17, first one has the front of the building as you would enter it, but the sign is actually more towards Waddell Street because the building is sort of at an angle to Waddell. And you'll see that Kate expertly photoshopped in the sign there.
Oh,
I'm impressed.
yeah.
Great.
It looks,
Yeah,
it
It's
looks
like,
like it's
hey,
actually
yeah,
there. It's like,
I was like, they already put it up, you know?
That's all I have. Presentation, happy to answer any questions. This is also temporary, I should add.
Yeah.
That as City Hall is being renovated, hopefully the bids came in today that were acceptable and that we can move forward with that project. We expect to be out for 1.5 to 2 years. So we would like some signage for folks to be able to pay our treasure, find our treasurer and pay our treasurer, who will be located in this building along with the Commissioner of Revenue's office.
right. And where exactly is the entrance corridor? Where are the bounds of the entrance corridor? Because this doesn't seem like the entrance corridor to me.
Don't have the zoning map, but this is actually the boundary. Because if you see, the boundary is between this parcel and the Moyer River parking lot. So this is referred to as the old VDOT property. So the old VDOT property is zoned C2, which makes it in the entrance corridor. But the school directly beside it is a residential zoning district with a conditional use permit for a school. So this is the boundary.
And then
Okay.
up the hill across the street, all those things.
Right, all those ones, right, which is why we had that long conversation. It is a little bit odd, though, that that they are subjected to the entrance corridor standards, given that you cannot see them really from the street.
Hmm.
Does anybody have any questions for Arnie? All right, we're going to open and close public comment for lack of public. And do we have any comments or concerns about the application? No? Okay, seeing as there are none, do we have a motion?
I move to approve the entrance corridor certificate of appropriateness application ECCOA 2025-01 for a new freestanding sign at 626 Waddell Street as proposed by the applicant.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries unanimously. Sorry, I do have one question for you. Is this photoshopped?
Oh.
So,
Oh, sorry, that was a joke.
Put it up.
Oh.
okay, so had I realized that, I would have asked this question earlier.
My mistake,
So-
sorry.
No, it looks to me like, I can't tell exactly how this sign is, but it looks like it's blocking the speed limit sign.
Uh,
I don't think it is.
We'll go out and
Very
revisit that.
Right, but you're taller than probably
no,
somebody
it
sitting in a
is-
car.
It is in an odd
Yeah.
spot relative to the building, so.
I would just suggest that probably needs to not block the speed limit sign for a school district. I mean, a school building. So they might want to move it if it is blocking from the street.
We'll make Public Works aware of it.
Yeah.
To see if it does, but it's just such a
I may
funky
not have been on the
angle.
street. I may have
Right,
been
right,
on
but I
grass,
couldn't-
so it-
Right, and I couldn't tell. Okay. Moving on to item C, ECCOA 2025-02, an application by the city of Lexington for approval of a certificate of appropriateness for new signage for temporary city offices at 539 East Nelson Street, tax map 30-7-9, owned by 539 East Nelson Street LLC. Do we have a staff report?
This sign has not been installed yet. This is what
There
it
it
will look like.
Yeah.
So again, for temporary office space, perhaps the best way to explain it is on the second page where you have the photograph of the building more from the back angle from, not Walker, Walker.
Walker Street, yeah.
So what we would like to do is have 3 signs, 2 of them of this size. And one is closer to the entrance for Lewis Gale with an arrow at the bottom that would bring them over. Because our entranceway to the second stairwell is all the way over to the right. So you'll see a number of windows and then finally an entranceway. That's how Kate and I will enter the building, go up to the second floor, and we will occupy the second floor with the remainder of the offices on City Hall that aren't going out to either Waddell Street, as we just saw, or the registrar that's going over to the school board offices. So we would like, as people pull into the parking lot, they will see, well, don't go into Lewis Gale, come over to the other entrance. We'll have another small sign of this size close to the entrance where we will be going in and out of, and then a larger sign, which is listed in here as being 36 by 24 on the Walker Street side. So that when people are driving by Walker Street, they'll see a sign slightly larger than this, making them aware that we're in that building. So 3 signs temporarily
And none of them will be on Nelson Street?
on Nelson Street.
And will the sign that's on Walker Street, so this is going to be on the building?
All these are wall mounted signs. So yes, they will be attached to the building face.
All 3 of them?
All 3 of them.
I see. What's the difference between where this one is by the door and the one that's the bigger one?
Bigger one's gonna go around the corner and be perpendicular to Walker. So you will see it directly from
See.
Walker Street.
So if you're on Nelson Street,
Like on this.
Potentially, yeah,
Thank you.
correct.
Yep.
And where is it going to be on the building itself? Do we know that? Or where are they going to put it on the side that faces Walker?
I don't know how best to explain whatever that corner feature is that's lighter colored. So between that and the first window on the right-hand side on Walker, if that makes any sense. So that blank wall or that section of wall between the corner feature and the window.
Okay,
And I can point
Yep.
that out if it's easier to come up
no,
there, and
I think I see which one. Yeah.
And then
That's
one
good.
by the door.
one by the door and one by the Lewis Gale door.
Mhm.
And again, these aren't terribly large, so these are more expected to be seen from the parking lot. But the one that's on the Walker Street wall is the one that we're expecting more folks to be able to see to come into that building.
Right. All right, any opening and closing public comment due to lack of public, and any comments, questions? All right. I do not have any additional ones either. So if we have a motion,
I move to approve the entrance corridor certificate of appropriateness application EC COA 2025-02 for 3 new wall signs at 539 East Nelson Street as proposed by the applicant.
all right, do we have a second?
A second.
All right, all in favor
Aye.
and opposed? And the motion carries unanimously. Congratulations to the city of Lexington. Okay. So, moving on to other business on the second page of the agenda. Are we having the discussion of institutional occupation of downtown? Do you
That
want,
was a request that had come from a previous meeting to have that on, so we added it and sort of expected. If you want to hold a discussion about creep and institutional uses downtown.
Was there a report back from city council on that, Arnie? I thought they
haven't
had a
up-
meeting about it.
I have an update in the sense that after they held their public hearing for the Rockbridge building, that vote was somewhat split. So they held a work session to talk about institutional creep and not a whole lot of direction for staff, but then they held another one just the last week. And again, not terribly much direction for staff as far as go change or consider a comp plan amendment or have planning commission consider a change to the definition or some other zoning tweak. But we are in the process of developing a resolution to initiate a text amendment for the educational facility, college, university use that could be a number of different things. It could be as simple as, and I guess the takeaway is we're working on something.
Okay,
It could be as simple as changing the definition, which then causes some problems because that definition is used for uses that are conditional in other zoning districts. So if we change it for C1, it impacts the definition, therefore the implementation of that definition in other districts. The issue, one of two issues, was really the administrative portion of it.
mhm.
So why are we asking for WNL or an agent for WNL, if you will, to come in for something when you or I came in for office space would not have to go through the CUP process? Then another ancillary sort of issue was some members of council, did not want to lose revenue. So they were trying to figure out how to protect if the university ever took over the building or the use, how that might affect our income and from the university. I'll just leave it at that. So there were a number of concerns. So we had a call yesterday with the attorney's office and are developing some potential amendments for consideration by council. So again, the takeaway is staff is working on something for council's consideration shortly. But
And
don't
that-
have a
that-
final
Right.
to tell you they're going to go in this direction or that direction.
And that's from a planning perspective.
Mhm.
Yeah, good. The other item I would throw out there for consideration would be could you somehow even just limit it to a certain percentage of office space being available in, in each block, for example, for institutional. I mean, that's a place to start maybe.
I wonder if how much of it is about who's in the offices versus who owns the building. Because W&L would be paying, or the building owner would be paying taxes if it's not W&L. But if it's W&L or BMI, they would not pay any taxes. Is that correct?
Taxes.
On, it's not a, I thought, sorry, I
So,
thought they were a
let me-
nonprofit.
Let me review that. When private developer has them as a lessee, it stays on the tax rolls.
Right.
When W&L comes in, let's say they were to buy something, or sometimes they're just gifted
Gifted it.
something by an alumnus.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, what happens at that stage, they pay us, and it's a complicated formula. I'm not going to tell you that I understand it completely, but as I understand it, they still pay a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes, and it's an agreement. Actually, it's a one-sided agreement because they've agreed to do it. We're not really party to it, but we're the recipient or the beneficiary of it. So they still pay for the property tax according to that agreement. I don't think there's any concern currently from council, and I shouldn't be speaking out of turn, but as we can see in the current political climate, just nationally, that things change. So that agreement for the pilot is done out of the goodness of, or just through the kindness of W&L. And it was something agreed to, I think, in 1990. We assume it's going to continue forever, but it doesn't hurt to perhaps consider protecting ourselves in case there is a change and trying to figure out how we can protect ourselves. Normally it would be through a condition and a conditional use permit. So maybe it stays the way it is as far as the definition, and educational facility stays a conditional use, and administrative facility as a subset of that stays in. So there's just a lot to consider as far as the potential impact and that sort of institutional foray into the downtown.
But if, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like, let's just take any building, who knows who owns it? And the owner leases it to W&L. And then after they've gotten a conditional use permit, they give the building to W&L. Then the conditional use permit, which goes with the land, not the owner, flows continuously, and there's no real way to have any oversight over that.
Two potential ways, perhaps more complicated than is necessary, but you can then put, if in those cases, if that's the concern, you put a time period on the conditional use permit, which isn't something we recommend, but that is one protection. Another protection is actually writing a condition that says something to the effect that as long as property taxes are paid, then the conditional use permit remains valid, or in the reverse, if they aren't paid, or if it doesn't, it's no longer on the tax rolls, then it's violated.
I like that. I like that as a resolution. And is that something that we can, that just then goes to council? And they would have to approve that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I'd also want attorney's review of that as
Yeah.
well. But by the time it gets to them, he would see that. But yes, if that's something, and again, with the thing I don't think I read in the record was conditional use permits, they have to be written to address an actual impact that is expected
Yeah.
from.
Mhm.
So we have to make sure, and then it's got to be proportional to. So there's just things to keep in mind
Mhm.
when writing or crafting a condition for a conditional use permit.
And so is that something that you all can put in as a condition for whenever that, whenever we have a situation that arises where it's an educational facility that is asking to use those office spaces, that the conditional use permit is in force as long as taxes are paid on the building?
We're in discussion about that now, and we will have an opportunity to perhaps put that into effect in the very near future.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That Answer everybody's concerns? Okay.
Is there any more discussion? I'm sorry, I thought,
Nope, that was good. I'm glad to hear that city council has been working on it. I was glad to hear that.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda under other business is Planning Commission priorities for 2025. So we have now just finished cottage housing, which was a priority prior, and from 2020.
Just so you know.
Wow. Wow. Do we feel better now?
Wow.
I think we're all feeling really pleased.
and perhaps to explain that a little bit, so we have so many new faces and members. We did an annual update in 2020, and then we had 4 big items that we put off to the side to do separately because we didn't want to mix them in because they took so much more discussion. And we've now gotten through those: plan development, mixed use, the one about cell towers, small cells, whatever that was that nobody understood. And then accessory dwelling units, and then now cottage housing. So we are at the end truly of our 2020 to-do list.
Yes. So but that means that we have an opportunity to identify other areas that we might want to take a look at as the planning commission and say, these are items that deserve some attention because maybe they provide some extra discussions during meetings, or, there's something maybe not quite finessed enough about them. One of those items that was on our list was entrance corridors, and Arnie, you had a list in your office of.
If
Can
you would
you
flip over to the other side of your cottage housing sample definition,
Good.
we provided for you the priorities, the list that was on the board in my office.
Thank you.
And just to go quickly through that, if I may, and they were prioritized. So the first 6 are numbered 1 through 6. One was the comp plan amendment for Maple Lane. That was accomplished, but that led to something else. Number 2 was a subdivision ordinance amendment for boundary line adjustments and boundary line vacations. I'm hoping but haven't had the review yet from our attorney to have those not go all the way to city council. It's a little bit silly to have a boundary line adjustment. They're just trying to move the line 5 feet one way or the other. Or if somebody wants to vacate, they have 2 lots. They want to vacate the intervening or intermediary prime property line to make it into 1 lot. Why would that need to go to council? That's really a ministerial function. I'm hoping to either have myself designated as to having that authority or planning commission. Number 3, cottage housing zoning text amendment. Yay. Annual text amendments that were that batch of 15 or so, that was already accomplished. One of the items that we thought about during that review of the annual text amendments was to develop some standards for mini warehouses. That's still to do, and review the entrance corridor standards. That is still to do. And in this past year, in addition to those 6, in particular, when we were doing Maple Lane, there was a request by the citizens that live along Maple Lane to also consider the next property over that's kind of wedged between them and the firehouse, and we haven't done that yet. That's I really would like some direction from council if they want us to bring that up or not. And then another item was townhouse standards. We have our townhouse standards are all of, I think, 4 standards, and they're lacking. And if council wants to go forward, because there was at one point a consideration for the VDOT property to perhaps become a townhouse development. And I thought, oh my goodness, I need to do townhouse standards before we actually have a property or a developer come in. But that's now sort of gone quiet, as you know, in the sense that the developer has walked away from both of his contracts for the VDOT property and for the Spotswood property. But that's still something that should be on our to-do list. Just had to figure out when. And then the last one is perhaps for the same reason to develop residential plan unit development standards. One of the other considerations at one point for the VDOT property was a development such or similar to Weatherburn, where they are single family detached, but they are on much smaller lots. And we used to have a plan unit development text that would allow that type of development, and we don't, because we really transitioned it from residential to commercial and now to mixed use. So perhaps we need to go back and revisit a more flexible plan unit development zoning that would allow something similar to a Weatherburn style development. And then, of course, we got the comp plan review.
Yes.
That is at a 5-year cycle, and we're now at that 5-year point.
Right. Although we might be able to accomplish that sort of as a side project, I'm thinking, because we have all year to work on that, correct?
There's no actual deadline. I mean, we could not do it. There's no teeth in the state code. It simply says comp plan amendment should be reviewed every 5 years. And as I understand it, as it's been explained to me, you can open it up and say, yeah, looks good. We reviewed it, and that'd be the end of it. But it's not similar to Florida, where you actually have to have a plan on how to do it. Public hearings, you have to submit it to the Department of Community Affairs at the state level. They review it and tell you whether or not you've done it adequately or not. It's not like that here. It's simply on our own to review it.
Okay. So why don't we set that aside just for the purposes of setting so priorities, and does anybody have any thoughts about these items? So we're looking at, on this list, 5, which is the mini warehouses, 6, which is the entrance corridor standards, and then sounds like mostly we're looking at the townhouse and PUD, the bottom 2 bullets.
Also number 2.
But that's the one
Oh, is
that,
that- okay.
that I think Arnie's hoping is going to get redirected into administrative.
Got it.
Can someone or review, I wasn't here for the mini warehouse. I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
We have a definition for mini warehouse, and I can't remember if we actually have any design standards, but we had a request at one point from the property owner for the property behind Sheets, still
Okay.
zone commercial, but they wanted to do single story mini warehouse. For what it's worth, my opinion is that's not a really great use for a piece of property that's on water and sewer and close into town. So that's not really much of an investment into a long-term use it might be needed, but perhaps we could have something better. So I was hoping to perhaps go through and fairly quickly, not as long as it took for accessory dwelling units or for cottage housing, to just develop maybe a handful of standards. We've actually already found one good example. So perhaps requiring 2-story, perhaps requiring more buffering, landscaping between the uses. We have to protect the cemetery across the street as an example. So it's just going through and perhaps developing more standards for mini warehouses so that somebody can't just put in gravel and 1-story block structures with a roof and overhead doors and no landscaping, no paving, no.
Right. And you're not referring to like storage units, you're just, storage
yeah.
units. Okay.
Those one.
Okay. Mini
we had a
storage
photograph
units.
of
Okay. Yeah.
Really
Like
plain
self-storage units.
self-storage,
Okay.
1-story.
Right. Got it.
Lots of overhead doors, no character.
And is that allowed in, I'm sorry, is that allowed in
Conditional
the?
use currently.
It is
So it would
conditional
come,
use,
but it
okay.
would be nice to have some standards for you to,
Mhm.
impose, perhaps better than what we have now. So that's why that was a flagged item for consideration. Perhaps.
So that one sounds pretty fast. You say you've already found an example that looks pretty good. And then how about the other ones? So if that's a fast one, fast and easy, is there of these other ones, low hanging fruit?
Well, to review the entrance corridor one, because also when we're going through the annual text amendments, actually one of our signs. Oh,
yeah.
The sign for the building that we're about to go in, we realized that all of the signs along East Nelson Street are on a nice, not concrete base, brick
they're brick.
base,
Mhm.
and then had a monument style sign. But our sign requirements don't require that. So we did a little bit of investigation, and years ago, Bill Blatter, my predecessor, had found some money in the city budget and went and negotiated with all those property owners to have smaller signs. And some of the photographs are pretty amazing. Ugly suburban tall signs.
It was pretty bad.
And now it looks so much better.
Yep.
But
I'm sorry.
Take it back in time.
Yes, exactly. It's like, wow.
That was never codified in the sign code. So
Right.
if you just wanted to review signs, which I don't think you want to just do, but that would be fairly quick. We could go out and measure each and every one of them and then develop standards for maximum height bid based on if it's a single user monument style sign or if it's a multi-tenant sign, because we could just go out and take measurements of what's there and develop something for you. I think the other part of that was a desire perhaps to get into sort of what happens in the rights of way or as far as accessing in, making sure that they have limited number of driveways, but internal accesses, because we will likely have the VDOT property, maybe the Lexington restaurant property redeveloped. So there are some redevelopment opportunities along South Main. So how do we require better standards for the redevelopment of those properties? That's going to be a little bit more complicated than if you just did signs, or you can just do signs now and do these other potential standards later. So it depends on how you want to handle the entrance corridor.
And if we did a more involved, have you all had any opportunity to sort of look for other examples of that?
Now, again, the signs are going to be fairly easy. It's just us taking out a measuring tape and hoping the snow goes away.
Mhm.
But no, it's definitely being more complicated to address sort of what happens in the public portion of the entrance corridors to improve access and visibility and buffers.
So could we chunk it then? Could we say, you just said that we could, take up the signs and then, pass that and then move on to other portions. I'm just thinking in terms of, trying to get things done a little bit more quickly than the 4 years that it took for some of these other items. If we could identify the areas of, and would it be an ordinance? Like a zone?
It's going to be a zoning text amendment, just like the other ones
Yeah.
you've done so far. So we would do it's either going to be in the entrance corridor section, or it's going to be also, or in both, the sign section, which is 13. So it could affect both of those.
Okay.
Yeah, I think with, there not being a whole lot of property left to develop in the city, that this is pretty key.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
I presume you mean not just the signage, but
yes.
the rest of it.
Yes.
That's, yeah,
Yeah.
all of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, particularly South Main, I think, which, has the potential
Mhm.
to have the pressure from whatever goes into the VDOT property, if something goes into the VDOT property. So let's hear about the other two. Townhouse and PUD, are either of those sort of a little bit more cut and dried? Or are they?
The townhouse should be easier than the complete entrance corridor, just because we should be able to find townhouse standards from other jurisdictions. One sticking point as an example, right now, our townhouse says all townhouses have to be on a public way or a public street. When we had a proposal for the Spotswood property, one was for townhouses. Well, they couldn't do it because we would need a 50-foot right of way to go straight through the middle of the property. And then every townhouse had to be, so it makes it very impractical to have all townhouses on a public street when the minimum standards are 50-foot right of way and 30-foot pavement. And it's a little bit nuts. It just requires too much land. So we should perhaps look at that so that we don't, at a minimum, require it on the public way, but also have a better product overall. Because right now we require, I think, 20-foot for a minimum parcel size, and some of them are 16, some of them are, so we might want to go down to 16 because that also fits well with building materials. Mind you, 20 does too. But so there might be a number of things that you want to look at for townhouse standards. Now, the pressure is not there currently for VDOT or for Spotswood in particular. So there's not a specific development coming in. They still have to go review, council does, how they want to handle those two properties. If they want to put them out for another request for proposals or a request for qualifications, those decisions haven't been made yet.
Okay.
So perhaps there's not as much pressure on townhouses, and even the same goes for planned unit development standards.
Okay. So it sounds to me like entrance corridor is the higher priority. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that okay? That's what I'm feeling as well. But that we have many warehouses sort of a little bit in the bag. Is that also accurate? So would it be possible for you all to bring us the mini warehouses language and then also be sort of collecting the information for the entrance corridor? Is that too much?
Many warehouses will be fairly simple, straightforward.
Mhm.
Signs, again, in entrance corridor will be fairly simple and straightforward. We're gonna need, I need to do some research on the entrance corridor standards other than signage, just to see what we can perhaps propose, and maybe we need to do just a little bit of education on what could happen by looking at, just like we did for cottage housing, looking at other codes, seeing what they
Right,
what
right.
what they implemented. And I'm thinking again more of requirements for entrances and exits, and making sure that there's interconnectivity between parcels, so you don't have to come out on South Main and go back in. There could be standards, improved standards for signage, for landscaping,
Yeah.
for lighting, for all those things. Because what we have is fairly minimal. It's minimal. Who's kidding? We have minimal standards currently in the entrance corridor, so those could be beefed up both on property, on private property, and what happens in the right of way to make improvements there.
So how would you all feel about moving right ahead with the mini warehouses and then having the
Sign.
entrance corridors be sort of the thing that's next?
Makes sense.
Does that work for everybody? And then we'll pick up the townhouses and planned unit development after we get those two done. All right. So it sounds like we've got our priorities. So we'll start and hopefully get that done quickly. So then the next item on the agenda is the comp plan. So the comp plan is a thing of beauty. I'm hoping that we've all had a chance to look through it, and it is actually, I love this document. I was thinking that in our review of the comp plan, that it might be helpful to have Arnie go through each section and have a table that shows what has been started, what has been finished, what things are ongoing, and what's the other one? And wow. Not started, things that are not that haven't been touched. Just so that we actually know where we are with the comp plan. This would not require a complete do-over, is my understanding of the comp plan. It would just be sort of a review that we could then, and if there are items within each section, we could, say, okay, city council, we recommend, taking a look at this, or perhaps adding something, and that would be an amendment at the end of the comp plan. So we're not talking about a complete redo of the document. And Ernie yes, there we are. So what I have in my mind is a checklist at the sort of on that far side, that where we could really take a look and say, okay, we can see where they are. Maybe they're color coded, so that it's easy to visually to read, because you go through this and you don't have any sense of what we've already done. And so I think that this could be helpful. And then the other thing that I was thinking was that maybe we could, sort of have one approach one section at a time. Obviously, we're not going to go through the entire section. The entire comp plan. But if we could go through one section, and with the goal of, if we have time on any given planning commission meeting night, we can, talk about a section. And it will mean a little bit of extra reading. We would all want to read through it, and if we have any questions or concerns about each item, just sort of say, oh, there's this, or where are we with that? And then Arnie would come and have an update for us on where things are. How does that sound as a proposal? How does that sound to you all as a proposal?
Just to be clear, what we would be providing you as we have time, just an update to the strategies, the goals, objectives, and strategies table. So not necessarily reviewing the language in each chapter, but just doing a working document, not changing this, but a working document with additional columns for the 4 items that you mentioned, which is something that's been started, something that's been finished, something that's ongoing, or something that hasn't been addressed yet.
Right.
So then you could visually see quicker. And I also learned when we did this for the land use chapter that I didn't know. I'm not going to know everything that has been started by the city or other entities, not for profits and whatnot. So I'm also going to have to rely on you all and your knowledge of the community as to what's been started and what hasn't, or different efforts that I'm just not going to be aware of. So that could be, as we go through, you'll just say, oh, but that one's actually been started by RAC or Rockbridge Conservation now, and because I might not know it. So that's, I think, is what the program will be. Does that sort of make sense
Right.
as far as?
And that could be what's in the addendum is that tape, the new tables with those, so that they're, would that make sense?
Well, I've got one issue with that in the sense that I was thinking more of a working sort of thing, but if you want to incorporate it in, this was done in InDesign, unless anybody knows InDesign and wants to volunteer. We just have to figure that technical part out because we don't have that software, but we could certainly add it, but then it might be confusing if you have 2 different tables. We'll figure that out.
Okay. Yeah, we could, yeah. So in terms of the actual language of the text, I would say that we should just review it. Not that we're going to make changes to it.
Yeah.
But that we should all be familiar with it on, ahead of whichever meeting we're.
I'm sure that as we go through the table, it's automatically going to refer to something, and maybe something doesn't need to be changed in the text from that review.
So we'll see.
We'll focus on the tables first and then see how that review goes.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. So do we need a motion for this? Do we? Okay.
No. I would plan on going through the chapters as they're laid out. Is that acceptable? Yeah. I
Absolutely.
think arts and culture was the first one, but just unless you all, historic resources, I lied. So unless you have any other priority, we would just follow the chapters as they are existing.
I think that makes sense.
So you're proposing 1 chapter each meeting as time permits?
As time
As
permits, I
time
think
permits.
what the
Yeah,
Fine.
because, there'll be meetings where we have plenty of time and then there are going to be meetings where we have lots of people in the audience like we have had and lots of discussion. So, and then we'll postpone. All right. So are we good on that item then? So, okay. So do you have
just one
Oh,
more
yeah.
thing to add to that? I'm also expecting at some point for council to provide direction on how they foresee this comp plan amendment review. So I think it's good for us to do exactly what we just mentioned, sort of in preparation for that. I'm expecting, for what that's worth, for there not to be a wholesale review, since we did such a big project last time in the total rewrite of the comp plan. So I'm thinking that it will be more about focused and perhaps on housing or other elements, but to be determined. So I'm
Right.
sure we'll be getting direction, perhaps not sooner than later, because they're going right into budget season.
Right. So we'll hope to get, down the road on this ahead of that, and then we'll be more able to address whatever it is that they'd like us to work on. And in the meantime, we'll be working on entrance corridors and mini warehouses. Okay, zoning and planning report.
The only thing to mention in the zoning and planning report is what I've already alluded to a little bit we had the discussion about institutional occupation downtown. We have received a conditional use permit that will be on your next agenda for educational facility, college, university use in the Grands building, in portions of the Grands building.
Of course. Right.
Can you refresh my memory on that, Arnie? That you only need the conditional use permit for offices if it's educational offices, correct? So any other office, it's by right, is that correct?
Correct.
Like insurance or attorneys? or
Medical
anything like-
offices and general offices is how we have them listed, or by right in the C1 zoning district, which is all of downtown. And it's only because a conditional use is the educational facility, college / university. And within that definition, there are some subsets such as administrative facilities, dormitories, physical plants, and other things. So because the administrative facility, which is what the office use is in most cases for WNL, when those WNL office employees come into downtown, because it's part of the definition for educational facility, and because the educational facility is a conditional use permit, they have to come before us for a conditional use permit. Or as you've already pointed out, if you put an office downtown,
They don't have
it would not have to come before us for a conditional use permit.
And they do have to have a shop or something in the front. Is that a requirement at this point?
No, it is not a requirement. The only
to.
time we
Street
have,
level you're talking about, right?
Yeah,
The
on the-
street level.
Street
we're
level,
talking
yeah.
About like.
First floor,
yeah,
street
for
level.
retail.
the only time that we have that requirement currently in our zoning ordinance is a dwelling unit cannot be on the main level in the C1 zoning district, because we want to protect that space, because residential unit is dead space. So you want an active sort of pedestrian way. You don't want dead space. So we require a conditional use permit for dwelling units on the first floor in the C1 zoning district to be hidden behind or screened behind office space, retail space, or behind a lobby.
So this is reminding me that we did talk about the possibility of having percentages of retail space versus office space
Yes,
versus
just gonna bring that up.
lobby
Yeah.
spaces. How would the planning commission address that? Would that be a C1 sort of how would we address proportions?
You mean if you had per block, you could have no more than 50% of the space dedicated to office on the first floor, or whatever the actual numbers are, something
Yes.
of that nature.
Something of that nature,
Um,
yeah.
That I have seen that. And I got to think of, I think it's possible. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to implement, because then we have to keep up with all the changes that are happening on that block, which isn't terrible in a small jurisdiction like ours. But I think you can do that, but it might come with some extra staff effort. And I can't think of a good, sometimes did we not have in the ADUs, you can't have more, as one of our sample, languages, ordinances has something like you can't have more than 10 per block, or so it was like first come, first serve, almost like
Right.
you had to get in, or you had to wait for somebody to stop renting. So that then we have to keep up with that. That's
Mm,
not
Well,
terrible.
maybe you could have like incentives or somehow prioritize restaurants and retail over offices if you have some sort of incentive for those people that want to bring that to the downtown.
Is an incentive, I'm not sure what the incentive would be.
I hope it's not money,
Indeed.
but we can address it in a couple of different ways. I think we're gonna have a great example coming up, and maybe,
Mhm.
well, it's public knowledge. The request is going to, if you ever been in the Grands building and you walk in off of Main Street, and then you went up a half a flight of stairs to the mattresses in the back,
Mhm.
upper back. So that upper back, so the retail spaces would stay. But that upper back portion is going to be a request for conditional use permit for office space. And then if you went in on the main level and went down a half a level, am I doing this right?
Or a
And
whole
down
level.
again. So
Yeah.
you're underneath the retail space in the basement. That is where they would also like to have administrative facility, meaning a copy shop. So in the basement and in the upper back, not prime retail space. So I think what you're maybe perhaps thinking is we need to protect the main level.
Mhm.
Luckily, that's not going to happen in this next example.
Mhm.
I don't know if that helps at all or puts you at ease in any
Oh.
way, but it's not going to be taking up prime retail space because John Adamson will keep the two retail spaces on Main and is still planning on cutting one in on the Washington side that's a half a level down from the main level,
Right.
because of the way the street falls.
which is great. So if we were interested in trying to protect the makeup,
Mm.
how would we do that?
I mean, percentage wise,
Procedurally, yeah.
well, it's going to be an amendment to the text. So going through that entire development of something.
Yep.
And I'm not sure what we're talking about quite yet. And I'm not sure anybody does, but somehow protecting, I presume, the main level
Yes.
Mhm, yes.
more so
Correct.
than if it's in the back or in the
Mhm.
basement, my mind, who
Right.
cares? If it's office space or a copy room.
Correct.
Okay.
So would you say that that sounds like a big ask? I guess that's my
To
first,
do the
like,
amendment?
yeah.
I would say, let's hold off and see what council is about to do, because I think as I mentioned earlier, staff is providing them with some options
Great.
to consider as a resolution to initiate an amendment. And if that's something, I'm not sure exactly when they're going to hear that, because again, they've just started budget season and they don't really have time for work sessions currently. But let's say they pick that up and they say, yes, we would like option A that you provided, have the planning commission consider that. And then we do what we've done with cottage housing, and we go look at options. This is going to be a lot more focused. This is
Right.
presumably something that says not on the main floor unless it's hidden behind, or hopefully we can borrow some language that we already have or find something, depending on what the intent is.
That sounds great. With the idea that if they do, it would bump it up to the top of our priority list. Is that right? Or thereabouts? Okay. All right. We don't have a or is there anything else?
Leslie did mention that they had that goal setting session. I think that happened since your last meeting, which was Saturday, with a number of staff, where they just went through sort of not strategic, but the goals for the year sort of thing. And then also more recent, which I've also mentioned already, is that second work session they held. I'm going to call it about institutional creep, but about educational facilities and their conditional use permits and what perhaps to do with that, which is why we have the task of providing them with some options.
Right. And in that conversation, you'll talk about the potential for requiring taxes.
Correct. That
Right.
was, at least from what I remember, at least one council member had that as a priority. I'm not going to say that there was a majority of them, because they weren't, it was just a work session type setting. But yes, that is something to consider.
And would that not also be the time, or would they also pick up the, having to have retail restaurant, whatever, on the first floor?
And I'm not sure I'm following in the sense, because we went from revenue to like a package.
Mhm.
Like in the
I think they were-
institutional creep.
I think they were more being protective than maybe trying to incentivize or say what should,
Okay.
other than what we already have in their code about residences, as an example.
Okay.
Sometimes we have to be, maybe this isn't necessary, but sometimes we have to be a little bit careful that, actually, there was a letter to the editor yesterday that said, why are they doing that? I'd rather see something else, which has absolutely, so we don't get to pick and choose. I have a preference that there be residential uses instead of a copy shop in the basement. Well, you're not really reviewing, that's not what you've been asked to review. You've been asked to review the copy shop, which is conditional use and blah. So yes, there might be a need for housing currently, but I would suggest that we focus on what the request is.
Yeah.
Sorry, that may have been unnecessary.
No, that's fine. Okay. So then I think we're waiting for a motion to adjourn. Unless you guys want to stay.
I motion to adjourn. Is that all I would say?
Yep, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you all
Thank
so
you all.
much.
Feeling okay,
good.
Krista?
Oh,
Stressed? Oh, boy.
and sorry, Kate, can you?
Thank you. No, I